Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a pleasant day. I just got my coffee and I realized my blush is off because it was before my coffee. So don't try to do your makeup before your coffee, but don't have that much time because I have a Russian class at 2 o'clock. So I really have to get moving so that we can discuss this. So every time the US is about to pull out, you get the same kind of concern trolling no matter what it is.
We can't abandon the Kurds now. We can't.
Steve? These ISIS fighters escape and pose a threat elsewhere.
About 2 years ago, when Trump said he was going to pull out of Syria, you got to what about the Kurds? The U.S. is needed to stop genocide, as though the U.S. actually stops any genocide as opposed to starts all the genocides. So anytime you pull out of Iraq, they'll find some sort of excuse to tug at your heart for the most gullible people on. It's no different. And I'm not exactly sure whether this is a pull out, force out, a little bit of both, what the hell is going on. So I won't opine on things I don't know. What we do know is that it looks like the president of Afghanistan has fled. A few years ago, the former president of Afghanistan wrote a book about what Assad should do in this transition to Syria. So he's a victim of the Assad curse.
One scenario that we've not discussed in detail, of course, is the survival of the Assad regime.
الشعب السوري بالساحات للمجد بيرفع رايات عم يهتف بثلاث كلمات الله وسوريا وبشار.
Okay, let me play it again in case you guys don't understand. This is
one scenario that we've not discussed.
This is the president of Afghanistan who just fled.
Survival of the Assad regime.
الشعب السوري بالساحات للمجد بيرفع رايات عم يهتف بثلاث كلمات الله وسوريا وبشار.
He wrote a book about the transition from that Assad needed to do out of Syria. And it looks like the Assad curse is hitting him again. So that's very funny. So he fled. And he was a puppet created by Washington. He was working for the World Bank. And exactly. Who must go? That's why we in this podcast will never ever say that. It's better to be called an Assadist than to have no podcast. See, I of course I created the little sis, but I thought it would be very interesting. He was working at the World Bank, and then there's this like really shady think tank called Institute for State Effectiveness that he was the founder for. Do you see this? Extremely shady. I don't know what they do. And then he was kind of installed as the president, and he couldn't even get majority support, so the US had to step in to broker an agreement. Anyways, so let's look at what happened in Afghanistan. And please donate because we need the money. And Google's really weird. They only pay you once a month, so you're kind of screwed. If it's really weird. So if you can, please use the super chats. Recommend us to your friends, families, enemies, anyone. But let's look at this New York Times article. 6 days of fighting killed 700 May 1993. This was on the Democratic Republic of Afghan government was gone. For a 6th straight day, Kabul was torn by gunfire and rockets as guerrilla factions battled for the control. Can you see this? Yes, you can. battled for the control of the pieces of the ravaged capital, 1,000 more wounded, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross. Throughout the day, troops loyal to the defense minister Ahmad Shah Massoud battled street by street in the capital's southern neighborhood. The BBC in Kabul reported the troops were trying to retake territory controlled by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was named the prime minister but never took the position. While those two factions battled, Hekmatyar was in the eastern city of Jalalabad, meeting with the representatives of the president Burhanuddin Rabbani. 17 days of talks and agreements have failed to reach an agreement. Since the end of the Afghan war, at least 4 factions divided along ethnic, linguistic, and religious grounds have fought for the control of Kabul. Kabul remained essentially untouched during the 14 years of war with Soviet occupying forces. Although peace came to much of the country after the Soviet forces, the ouster of President Najibullah more than a year ago, that's the Soviet Democratic Republic, the president of the Democratic Republic, last one, violence came to Kabul, which violence did not come to Kabul, but whatever. In the last year, vast swaths of the city have been reduced to rubble as warring factions have sought to extend their influence or capture what they believe is the seat of government. As Kabul disintegrates into a jigsaw puzzle of warlord-dominated fiefdoms, almost 1 million people fled Kabul. Okay. Afghanistan itself has been partitioned among traditional rulers and local councils. After the fall of President Najibullah, rebel factions negotiated in Peshawar, Pakistan, on an interim government. Mr. Rabbani, who led Jamaat-e-Islami faction, became president. On an assembly just before the first year, in an assembly, not democracy, an assembly, Mr. Rabbani was elected a 2-term president and bid farewell to his party. But 5 of the 9 factions boycotted the assembly and accused Mr. Rabbani of winning the presidency with bribes. He was sworn in, but his formal inauguration has not given him authority over all of Kabul. A Pakistan brokered arrangement hammered out last March among the competing factions. Mr. Hekmatyar, who leads Hezb-e-Islami faction, was named prime minister. Nominally in charge of Kabul, troops belonging to Mr. Massoud, a former Jamaat-e-Islami commander, a Tajik from northern Afghanistan. Mr. Massoud was named defense minister shortly after fighters marched into Kabul a year ago. Okay, we need to save this again. He was by the way, Hekmatyar was a total psychopath. He would throw women's acid. He was like I said, total psychopath. He threw acid in women's faces for wanting to go to school. Just a horrible person. And there's a picture of him with the Zigbin. I can never pronounce Mika's dad. I'm just gonna call him because I'm gonna just screenshot this for later. His strongest opponent was financed by Pakistan and the United States. I hope that part is clear. Mr. Hekmatyar, who's seeking to create a theocratic Islamic state, except he's a total psycho, whose heavily armed army was financed by Pakistan and the United States. I hope that part is clear again. For years, I just wanted this to be very clear for people. Let me just zoom in. John Y. Spinoza, also controlling parts of Kabul. Kabul's now devastated western suburbs is Hezb-e-Walat, a Shiite force with the backing of Iran. In addition, have to remember these names, but we'll do it later. Abdul Rasul Sayaf, a fundamentalist who is supported by Saudi and other Arab fundamentalists, has carved out a wedge of Western Kabul today. Today, under a rain of artillery and rocket fire, dozens of members of an ad hoc peace mission maneuvered between warring forces in an effort to end bombardment. Defending Mr. Rabbani's government and fighting off other factions, Mr. Massoud has refused to allow, thank God, Mr. Hekmatyar to enter the city. Kabul's population, which bulged to more than 1.5 million during the 14 years of war, has been cut in half in the last year as residents fleeing warfare have escaped to the east to the relative safety of Jalalabad and others to the northern territories controlled by Abdul Rashid Dostam, a former general in the Najibullah government militia. General Dostam attributes the ouster of Mr. Najibullah to his defection to the side of the Islamic guerrillas. Interesting how this all works. I kind of don't like that because it's not the same. I don't know. It seems kind of Western chauvin. Okay. I like her, but it's Western chauvinistic. Just because somebody's wearing Western clothes does not make their government good. And if somebody's wearing Eastern clothes, what if they're wearing a sari or a salwar kameez? What if they're wearing a scarf? Does that make their government worse? So I hate that. But what you should show is photos of girls going to school, no matter what they wear. That's the main difference, whether they're in school or not. And I would love to talk to her about it, tell her what I think. I like her a lot, but I can talk to her more about this kind of little annoying imperialism. There's also a little bit of a classism with that. Okay, so what you should have gleaned from this article is that there are a whole bunch of psychopaths who are having a turf war in Afghanistan. And this was essentially what happened when they stopped fighting the communists. And this is exactly what will happen to Syria if Assad falls. These psychos, the moderate rebels, they'll all start fighting like drug dealers with turf wars. They are none of the above. This is still a little early, 1993. So the Taliban does not exist yet. These are just the freedom fighters of Afghanistan, the brave Mujahideen, whatever Rambo dedicated that movie, it's these people. So what happened is that once the Soviets left, it took them 3 years to defeat the Democratic People's Republic of Afghanistan after the Soviets left. It took the Taliban 12 days, 5 days, I don't know. So it shows you that what people were willing to die for and what people are not willing to die for. Yes. Okay.